bills, I've mentioned 40% higher since this government took office, 15% higher than the national average since then. Is life more affordable because we're seeing people lose their jobs? Because this government is not listening to the needs of small business, and one of those big needs is lower power rates. And if you talk to the Canadian Independent Federation of Business, lower power rates is one of their biggest concerns. Another one is the need to strengthen our domestic economy so people have money in their pockets to spend. They don't have that when they're paying out an extra $4,000 for a family of 4 since this government took office. This economy needs more money going to the small business owners of the province because they're paying it to people who are working for them. That's what this province needs. This budget doesn't do that, Madam Speaker. We can't support it. And, you know, Madam Speaker, I encourage the members to think about, I see some of them doing ads for Buy Local. Why don't they think about that? Why don't they think about people in their own areas who would have more money to spend locally if they weren't adding to the debt and increasing the taxes that people have to pay? Madam Speaker, life is not more affordable. This government has failed their election promise in 2009 to do that. And, you know, I guess they have achieved something, and it's something that they've railed against, and that's the fiscal mismanagement of the people who came before them. We often see them pointing across at both the Progressive Conservatives and the Liberals for their past fiscal mismanagement. The very thing they're railing against, they're doing themselves right now. $1.67 billion in debt in 5 years. More debt per year on average than any administration in the history of the province. Well, I'm referring to 5 years because after this year, that's 5. And I want to be fair to you. If we did it over 4, it would be even higher. So I'm being kind to you. I'm being honest. I'm being honest. That's $1.67 billion over 5 years. So, Madam Speaker, you know, the very thing they're railing against, they're doing themselves. They need to have a look at that. Madam Speaker, they need to be, as my old friend Cyril Reddy used to say, they need to be a Saul on the way to Damascus. They need to have a turnaround here. They need to understand what they're doing. And there is no sanity in spending money that we don't have today and money that we don't have tomorrow. You look back in the past at the deficit budgets in the past. Have we ever paid them in the future? Very poor record of doing that, and that's of any government, any party, because we've all been in the government side at this point, Madam Speaker. There is no sanity in spending money that we don't have today and money that we're not going to have tomorrow. At least not until we have a government who can work with the job creators, the small businesses in the province, to turn the economy around. And for that reason, Madam Speaker, we cannot support this budget. And it saddens me to see how high the provincial debt has grown under this government. You know, I thought we were turning a corner, to borrow a phrase from the government side, when Premier Ham started to balance budgets in 2002, 2003. You know, we started to see the overall debt of the province flatline. We start to see it go the other way. And now, when it flatlined at $12 billion, instead of starting to go downward, it went up, and now it's about $13.7 billion now. So, and that's about, you know, it's almost $14,000 for every man, woman, and child in this province. And we don't have to pay it today, Madam Speaker, and we probably won't. We can't, unless everybody forked over that amount of money. But, you know, it's just going to hang with us. It's going to hang over our heads. And that's why we can't support this budget, because we don't see this government making an honest commitment towards reining in spending, lowering taxes, making the economy more competitive. Madam Speaker, do I have a minute left?
You have more than a minute, but I'm going to interrupt for a moment. Thank you. Regarding my decision of disorderly conduct and unparliamentary behaviour by the member for Yarmouth, excuse me, I've been advised by the clerk that the proper procedure would have been by a motion and a vote in the House for a 5-day suspension. Therefore, at this moment, no suspension of 5 days is made by is in order for the member for Yarmouth. I have two options here. One is to proceed with the motion and have a vote, or not, and proceed with my original order of a 1-day suspension. In light of the unparliamentary behaviour and disrespect of this Speaker, I'm prepared to revert to my original order of a one-day suspension for the remainder of this day for the member for Yarmouth. But I will remind all members of this House that adherence to the parliamentary rules of order and respect for the Speaker, all members of the House, is of the utmost importance for the work that is done in this Nova Scotia House of Assembly. I ask that all members be mindful of this in the days ahead, and I would now proceed with the remainder of debate on the Financial Measures Act. Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Well, Madam Speaker, I'm going to finish up here just by saying that, you know, we will not be supporting this budget because we refuse to stand by and watch this government steer our province away from its rightful place, a place where it should be amongst the competitive, job-creating jurisdictions in the world. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to speak now on third reading for Bill 51, the Financial Measures Act. And we've had a number of speakers here this morning, and I believe that there have been some good points raised around the veracity of the projections in the budget, whether or not the budget can be safely called balanced, which we don't believe it is. So there's been a lot of reasons why that has been said, and I've said it here before, and I guess today I have the opportunity to say it again. So I'm pleased to know that there are several readings on each bill and that we can continue the discussion around the economic indicators for the province, around the current state of our economy, job creation, personal income tax, the impact of HST on our residents, as well as the overestimation of HST in the budget before us. And by way of context, Madam Speaker, the Financial Measures Act, I think as members know, but I don't know that everybody knows, it goes hand in hand with the budget. They are really sister bills that come through together. You have measures in the budget that need to be enacted in law, and this Financial Measures Act can be used to change all kinds of different acts. It's an omnibus bill in that you can use it to reference different acts that need changes. So what we see in this Financial Measures Act is the enactment of all of the fee increases that required legislative change. Now, Madam Speaker, the member for Preston spoke about the 1,400 user fees that have been raised twice in the time that this NDP government have been in power. Most recently, the last day of March, last business day, we had a tabling of a document showing all of the fee increases for the coming year. And many of them, I believe, took effect on April 1st, the beginning of the next fiscal year. Madam Speaker, the fee of almost 6% was used for the majority of those fee increases. That was the figure that was chosen to sort of represent a cost of living increase that had taken place over the last couple of years. But Madam Speaker, that doesn't account for those fee increases. A fee increase, by definition, has to be related to the cost of providing a service. The government does provide a multitude of services. Obviously, there's 1,400 different times and situations where the public need to get a permit or receive a document or transfer property or get married or register a death. All of those interactions with government require some paperwork, some assistance, and therefore have a fee attached. But what is missing in this Financial Measures Act, what has been consistently missing in every budget brought in by the NDP, is any justification for those fee increases, other than taking an arbitrary cost of living increase and just attaching it to every service provided. That's not justifiable. That's not legitimate. It isn't verifiable, and it is in complete contravention of what the government, when they were in opposition, called for. They challenged the past governments time and time again, saying, why don't you justify these fees? How can you add a new fee without a justification? And so on. I mentioned previously there are some fees that have been added into the current batch of fees that were announced that didn't even exist before. there had not been a fee for some of those land transactions and legal fees that now I know the lawyers are going to be just passing these on. It was a law office that brought them to our attention. One of them had gone from $0 to $100. So that's certainly more than a 5.8% increase. So we know that buried in the $1,400, there are going to be some that are brand new fees, some that are much more than 6%, and all of which have come with no justification. So right off the bat, the section in this FMA that enacts all of those fee increases are not, I don't believe are justifiable, and we don't support them. And Madam Speaker, in discussion at Committee of the Whole, I introduced amendments or spoke to different clauses, and I called for them, all of the areas relating to fee increases to be defeated. And the government voted in favour of each and every one of those fee increases here as we had held a vote on different clauses. And the opposition Liberals, the official opposition, opposed each of those on the grounds that they are not explained, that they are in fact taxes and not fees. And that in the past, the former Minister of Finance, and I believe it was the Premier, the current Premier of our province, had called that kind of increase of fees as nothing more than a tax grab. That was really what it amounted to. And I think the total amount that was collected as a result of all these fee increases in the range of about $11 million, something like that. I know in the scheme of the whole budget, the Finance Minister might say that's not material, it's not all that much, but we know darn well that that is a lot of money, that every dollar that's collected is needed to provide services, and that we have to be accountable for every dollar. And so $11 million is a lot of money because it's coming directly out of the pockets of Nova Scotians, and that's all outside of the tax regime. It's not part of the taxes. It's something that every Nova Scotian will see when they renew their driver's license, renew their car registration, register the birth of their children or a death in the family, or look for documents that they need for any number of reasons. Again, I understand costs go up, Madam Speaker, but the fact is that there needs to be an explanation, and the government departments have that. Surely they can justify what they're doing. I mentioned before that government's way of conducting business is more and more over the internet. So if we're doing everything over the internet now, right down to registering our cars, why can't we see a decrease in fees? Why don't we actually recognize it costs less? Because once you've set up the platform, all of the computer side of it, then really there is not much of a cost. So I think we should not be supporting this, absolutely. We should not support these fee increases that are buried in the Financial Measures Act. The second part of the Financial Measures Act that I took exception to and our party took exception to here in law amendments and here at Committee of the Whole House was the section, the provision that lowers our threshold for small business taxes. Madam Speaker, often when we're talking about financial issues, financial numbers and so on, it's always a little confusing. You would think lowering of anything would be a good thing. Lowering of taxes is a good thing. But lowering a threshold has a completely different meaning and different outcome. If you lower the threshold for the small business tax down to $350,000, as has been done in this Financial Measures Act, you are throwing more small businesses into the corporation tax level. It means that at the $350,000 level of income, they are thrown into the corporate tax bracket, and that bracket is 16%. Now, in the same Financial Measures Act, we see the enactment of a small decrease in the taxes for small business. They go down from 3.5% to 3%. And that's been a plan to slowly reduce them, 0.5 percentage point a year. And now we're down to 3%. Business looks forward to that. People like that. But the part of the story that the Finance Minister didn't tell the Chamber of Commerce that was sort of buried in the whole story was that at the same time as one hand was reducing the tax rate for small business, the other hand was making more of those small businesses, throwing them into a higher tax bracket and treating them as corporations. That's quite a difference. And the government themselves said this little decrease in small business tax is revenue neutral, so they won't collect anything more, but some businesses are going to pay more. That's just it. They made up for the decreasing tax by putting some companies into a high tax rate. And so good for government, it's revenue neutral. bad for business because it's only half the story that was brought out in the government's own press releases and you know, hoopla around doing something good for business. And in the opening remarks of the finance minister, it was interesting to note that she was talking about being clear and precise and forthright. Those are 3 words used in the minister's introduction to the third reading today. And she was calling upon the, Madam Speaker, she was calling upon the opposition to be clear and forthright and precise. And I would challenge the minister and all members of the government that it goes both ways. You can't provide half the story and not tell the other half of the true picture and then expect that that is considered forthright. In fact, what that does is undermine the trust in what information we receive from government. And that's exactly how we feel here in the opposition. The official opposition Liberals don't believe that we can trust the information given to us by government. We've seen a number of circumstances where that has been the case. This is only one that I mentioned, just one out of the whole gamut of things. And I can go on at some length about several others. And I'm sure I'll have the opportunity today, because should I decide to, I can stand in my place for an hour and go through a litany of issues and times that the government has not told the whole story. They've told half a story, or they've put the spin on it, and we know there's been no better government for spin than this particular government that we've had for the last 4 years. And the spin has been very positive always, very optimistic always, but when the actual reality in your homes, in your neighborhoods, in your businesses do not back up any of that optimism and spin, then you get a time when people just no longer listen. They don't trust the government. They don't listen. They think it's all hype and no substance. And that's what we've seen. Endless ads on television about jobs and jobs and jobs here and jobs are coming. We all pray that jobs are coming and that there's a time of economic prosperity. But if you sound that alarm and herald it again and again and the jobs aren't there and the jobs aren't in sight and the shipbuilding contract doesn't even have any they talk about cutting steel. The steel doesn't begin to be cut until 2015, I think, at the most recent I've heard. And so the jobs are some way out. They're still several years away. And yet these ads on television show all these people in hard hats having a marvelous time working. And we know most of those hard hats and most of those workers out from Nova Scotia are out west. They're up north. They're in Fort Mac and other even more remote places in Alberta. And they're working, we've heard and we've seen articles in the paper about that whole lifestyle that's begun now in Nova Scotia, where families are split and one member or the parents are working in Alberta and coming back and forth. It's particularly prominent in Cape Breton. We know that there's millions of dollars coming back into the economy of Cape Breton from, they are residents. I was going to call them non-residents, but they really are technically Nova Scotian. They are residents of Nova Scotia, but all of their income and all of their work time is spent out west. And that's a travesty. It's going back in time to a time when there was no work and people had to travel the world to earn a living. And I know that because they have a love of Nova Scotia, many of those families have made that sacrifice, and they're willing to stay and to keep at least their family here, own a home here, try and maintain a life here in the hopes that there will be an opportunity down the road, a chance to bring their skills back to the province. But the reality is, and what I'm trying to point out, Madam Speaker, is that the reality is that on the ground and in our communities, whether it's here in Halifax, in Cape Breton, the South Shore, anywhere you go in the province, people aren't feeling the optimism that the government is trying to instill in them through these ads. And Madam Speaker, just recently we saw, and I believe it was just April, it's April 2013, the CFIB Business Barometer came out. I had talked earlier about CFIB in their pre-budget consultations. I should say CFIB are the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. They represent, I believe it's more than 6,000 small businesses in Nova Scotia, and they certainly work across the country as well. They do something that's quite useful, I think, to government and to members of the House. They do a regular survey of their members about how they feel about the economy, whether they feel like they'll make some major purchases of equipment, or or do anything that's going to be costly? Are they going to take on more staff? Do they expect to expand? All of those questions are surveyed on a regular basis to see how they feel. And then they measure us against the rest of the country to see how the rest of the country feels and where we stand. And Madam Speaker, we are so consistently low in terms of business optimism. It's really, it's more than a pity, because if the business owners don't feel a sense that there is going to be better times around the corner, and if they don't feel that optimism, they will not be in a position to invest. And that can be investments in productivity, investment in equipment, investments in more people. They just can't do it. And I know we've said before that most small business owners would love to expand. They are in many small communities in the province. They know their employees well. It's not like a big corporation. They know the people working for them. They want to hire more people and play a bigger role in their communities. But the Business Barometer, which had just come in April, it was only actually last week, I think we saw it, showed that they had a lot of concern. And I'm just going to read this part of it, Madam Speaker. Nova Scotia has had the biggest dive in business optimism of any province in April. Its index now stands at 53.8, the lowest in the country. So 53.8, the lowest business optimism in the country. New Brunswick is at 58. I heard the Minister of Finance saying how bad their financial situation is in New Brunswick. Well, they're about 5 points higher in business optimism than we are. And certainly Alberta and British Columbia are 65 and 67% in this index. So again, the point from CFIB, and it's a sad one for us to hear and listen to today, is that Nova Scotia had the biggest dive in business optimism of any province in April. So, Madam Speaker, here we are at budget season, April, the month that we bring in a new budget for our province. And we can know without a doubt that business in Nova Scotia do not share the optimism that might be the wish of the NDP. They don't see the last 4 years as having been positive 4 years for our province. As has been mentioned before by other members, the small business sector wonder what support there is for them when they see millions of dollars going out the door to big corporations, international, multinational corporations, getting a lot of government support, being bailed out, in fact, being bailed out and then hightailing it out of our province. Let's look at Bowater, taking money that was intended to keep them open another 5 years and closing within 5 or 6 months of that announcement. You know, what a travesty for the province. Even the people in the area, in Queens and around Liverpool, felt that it was only at best a stopgap measure to put millions of dollars into the plant there. The level of employment had fallen significantly from the highs of years ago down to, you know, it might have been, I think it's less than 200 jobs were there even at the time when the money was given. But, you know, nevertheless, it was the livelihood for many people. But they had seen a constant erosion of the employment in the mill in Bowater anyway, the Bowater mill at Brooklyn. But at any rate, they saw it not as the long-term solution, but as a short-term measure that might help the county in that area to look at options and to have a little time to recover and have a way forward. I think actually they're more optimistic now because it's basically that the worst has happened, the mill is closed, and now they need to redefine the economy of that area. And that's certainly the challenge across the province, in every corner of the province. I know there is a task force now looking at rural economy, and that's important because we need to find ways to find real optimism, real areas of expertise that can be developed, that are the assets that our province has. Because we have all chosen to live here. We all hope that our children will stay, that there will be an opportunity for them to contribute in our province. Our province has a tremendous history, and it may not have been, you know, certainly not in the last 100 years, a boom province, but we've made a province that has a lot of quality of life, a lot of things they can offer the people who choose to live here and come here. And I often speak about immigrants, Madam Speaker. I think they're a big part of what we need to attract, and we do need those jobs if they're going to come here. But they want to live in Nova Scotia because they see us as a wonderful size in terms of our towns and cities. Even our biggest city, Halifax, for many immigrants is seen as a wonderful size of place to live. And for that reason, you know, we have assets we can sell, that we can attract people from around the world. And I believe when you look at things like the Creative Cities movement we have here in HRM and in some of our other towns, some of the right elements to attract a young workforce, a technologically adept workforce, that it really doesn't matter with technology for many industries where they live. They can live in any location because they're doing so much via the internet and via the digital world. So we have things like a wonderful IT company in Lunenburg that's set up to do gaming and create sports games. We have some really good positive stories out there. And they attract a young workforce because what a great lifestyle to live in Lunenburg, to sail and to fish and to enjoy the woods and the countryside. People love that, and young people want recreation and they want entertainment. All of those things are available. And so on that Creative Cities movement that was written about by Richard Florida, who lives in Ontario now, it's got a number of indices that help us know what assets we have to attract the industry of the future and the young people to work in those industries. And we have some real benefits, Madam Speaker. But people want honesty. They want to have a forthright conversation with government. They want clear and precise information, and that's not what we've been getting from the government. It's not what's reflected in the Financial Measures Act or in the budget that was passed last week, although I will reiterate that the opposition, and certainly the official opposition Liberals, voted against that budget. And again, with this Financial Measures Act, because they are hand in hand, really, the budget and the Financial Measures Act, we will not be supporting the Financial Measures Act. But the Minister of Finance asked clearly about some of the measures that are positive for people that are in this Act. And I want to speak to those measures because there are some good things. There's always some good things in a budget and in an FMA like this. We saw it in the years that I sat here when it was a Conservative minority government. And in those days, the budget passing or not passing would trigger an election if there was a vote of non-confidence. And we saw those years where the NDP would vote against a budget that had good measures for people, but they did it because it was a motion of non-confidence. They were saying to the government, we don't like your government, we don't like what you're doing. And so the NDP would stand and vote against a budget that had some good measures in it. That is what happens in this House, that we have to look overall and say, do we have confidence in the government? If we vote for your budget, then we are saying to the government, Madam Speaker, that it is a great budget, that we think the government's doing a great job. Well, we don't. We don't think either one of those things. And therefore, it's a matter of principle that we will oppose this budget, because we do not have confidence in the direction of this province and the direction it has taken under the NDP. Madam Speaker, it's alarming almost to people that are in, especially people that have been staunch supporters of the NDP, to see some of the measures that have come into play in the last 4 years. And I shared the interest, maybe even excitement that some people had about seeing what would happen with the first NDP government in the province. Would they do something different? Would they have a different direction? What was going to happen? Everybody thought it was time for a change. I'll grant you that, and a change came. But it has been a tremendous disappointment to the people of Nova Scotia. And I think that there are so many reasons we can point to. Let's look at social assistance, for example, under community services, Madam Speaker. Again, I've been in MLA for 10 years, so 6 years of that time we had a Conservative government. The last 4 years, we've had an NDP government. And I've never had so many calls from people that have said, we're being harassed, we're being sent to the doctor every second day for notes, we have to document 1,000 things. The cost of the medical system must be huge, all the doctor's visits that are required to constantly verify that a person has a disease and needs a special diet, that it's justifiable to give them an extra $30 or whatever it is a month to supplement the very low rates of support that we give to people on community assistance. And people are feeling like everything is being scrutinized. People are having their bus passes revoked. How can a person look for work if they don't have a bus pass in a city like Halifax? How can you get around? You can't. I know members in the House here probably share with me that we know people who are on assistance or they're very, very low income and they take taxis sometimes. I said to them, you can't afford taxis, that's too much. Out of your whole income, that's a big share of income to take a taxi from Clayton Park to go downtown for any reason, to go to a hospital appointment or to go to a job interview. It's just too much. But they don't have bus passes. They don't have support. We still don't pay for a telephone for people on social assistance. And that was raised years ago. I mean, it's come up from poverty advocates that surely at a minimum, you need a telephone number if you're job hunting. You have to be able to give a number along with your address. These things have not been addressed for the poorest of the poor during the time that the NDP have been in government. In fact, people are being squeezed. And honestly, Madam Speaker, I'm not a bleeding heart. I just listen to people and I hear their stories, and it has been a much more difficult time in the last 4 years than it was prior to that for people on assistance or people who are looking for assistance, people who are looking for some help. And I think that has been a real surprise to me. I never expected the NDP to pander to that group, but I thought that they would support them and provide, some of those necessary supports. But I think the NDP have governed looking for votes. They've looked for the middle ground. They've looked not to speak to their traditional base, but to try and seek votes in a different category, maybe in the middle class and in a middle ground. That's what I would say. And so they've abandoned people who relied on them. And I think that has been a great shock. I want to remind members of the 2009 election. And I know that as I went door to door in 2009, the 2009 election, we heard at door after door, oh, I'm a member of a union, and my union's telling me I've got to vote for the NDP, that this is their time, that the union was identifying that, whether it was NSGEU, whether it was CUPE, whether it was auto workers, any number of unions, the whole Federation of Labour had lined up and said, it's our time, we can get the NDP elected. But I don't think the Labour movement is thrilled either, Madam Speaker. I don't think that they've seen some of their priorities move forward through this last 4 years. That's what I'm hearing. That a lot of people that had been Labour supporters are no longer there. The member from Preston spoke about the retired NSGEU workers. I think they're called Nova Scotia Government Retired Employees Association. They were absolutely shocked when changes came to the Pension Act, which took away their indexing, which had been a given from the time they joined the service. Many of them, we're talking 30 and 40 years ago. People live a long time into retirement, and a lot of them have been retired much longer. So what we're seeing is people that had chosen jobs in the public sector, knowing that they would probably earn less. In the past, that was the case. It may not be today, but in the past, if you chose a public sector job, you chose it because of security. You chose it because of things like your pension benefits. You didn't choose it because you were going to earn more money. And these people worked their whole careers with the idea that they were the kind of people who wanted the security and the stability of being good public servants and giving to the province while they knew that the reward would be in their retirement years. That's when they would at least have a living amount of money to live on. As another member mentioned, I believe it might have been the member from Preston as well in his hour-long discussion today. He actually spoke about the Nova Scotia Government Retired Employees Association, not union, and said how very disappointed they were because these are not people who have huge incomes. A few people might have been deputy ministers and retire with a big pension, but the majority of them are people who've worked on the roads, people who've worked in offices, admin assistants, and so on, and their pensions may only be $12,000, $14,000, $15,000 a year, and now they get no indexing to keep pace with the cost of living. And that is something that I would challenge any member of the government. Nobody in the union would ever have thought that would be the motion and the move that would have happened under an NDP government. And had the NDP been in opposition, there would have been a huge outcry. Oh, there would have been great gnashing of teeth and so on, because in opposition, the NDP were a very effective, noisy bunch that could, raise Cain if they chose to, and certainly got outraged very easily. And in fact, I will go so far as to say we're sanctimonious. They held the entire high ground. Oh yes, the high ground, moral high ground on every issue. because they defended the underdog on every issue. So the whole idea of balance, I think not. I think the current NDP have had 4 years in government to show that they would respond to the people who care, the people that they previously spoke to, the people whose votes they previously courted, and I think they've let them down. And I think that the next election, I won't be hearing from the union members that they felt an obligation to vote for the NDP. I think I'll be hearing we gave them a chance. They had their time. We were disappointed. We didn't see the kind of moral high ground that they previously spoke about. We didn't see them act on the years of discussion and issues that they had set up when they were in opposition. The NDP had created principles, values, things that they were aiming for, but they didn't live them when they got to government, Madam Speaker. And the record will show it. People can disagree with me on the other side of the House, and that is what we're here for, some respectful debate. But whether they admit it or not, the record shows what was done. The record shows that people have been pushed off social assistance, squeezed on social assistance. The unions have not been supported, as we saw with, at least with retired members. Maybe there's some help to current ones, I'm not sure, but I think there's been a disappointment there as well. And I think when I look at the women's groups and so on, they've had a little bit more funding, but there was only a big response in light of a national tragedy, really. That's when we're seeing a response today, an announcement downstairs on sexual assault, the start of Sexual Assault Month, and some actions taking place. And I know the members will remember in opposition, we did stand side by side on calling for a domestic violence study and that we'd have a domestic violence strategy put in place, that we would work with community groups to put that in place. That was not allowed under the Conservatives. They squashed that bill on third reading. They didn't allow the bill to go forward, which I had presented, but the government put forth their own government-mandated, government-controlled study, and the NDP have done really much the same as the Conservatives in bringing that domestic strategy forward, domestic violence strategy forward. And once the initial consultation was done with the committee that included individual organizations, like the women's shelters and women's centers and advocates for second stage housing. Once that committee had done their first report, they were not consulted any further. Then everything went into the bowels of the government and into the venue of different departments, and there was no more consultation. And the community have felt shut out of that again, to their great surprise, Madam Speaker, because they believed that the NDP were going to be the kind of government that actually brought them to the table and listened to them and would incorporate their thoughts that they knew best from being on the front line with these issues. But the reaction has been, as much as the Conservatives, more insular, more closed, less open, and yet the speech from the throne, Madam Speaker, was full of consultation and endless strategies. But what's gone on here is 4 years with very little action, very little improvements. Anyway, Madam Speaker, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the positive taxes that are in this FMA, in the Financial Measures Act. There is some respite, some help on children's clothing, feminine hygiene products, about not being taxed, and a couple of others. I do have them in here, so I'm going to just have a look. The rebate for the first-time home buyers is going to be put in here. Something about rebates for computers and vehicles for persons with specified disabilities, firefighting equipment for volunteer fire departments and municipalities, building materials used to repair, improve, or restore heritage projects or properties. Those weren't mentioned as much by the minister, but they are in that section 19. I think it's clause 19 of the Act. And Madam Speaker, the leader of the Liberal Party and members of the Liberal Party have never said that we don't support this. And in fact, each and every one of these individual taxes or rebates or supports are positive. And the improvements to children's dental care, that's positive. There are some good things that we want to see that make our life in Nova Scotia better. But we have to look at that and balance what the NDP's record is. The NDP's record is raising HST by 2 cents, which was actually a 25% increase, bringing in over around $350 million more every year into the province. And that would be one thing, Madam Speaker, when you have your consultation and do your budget discussions around the province. But that cycle of budget consultations followed an election where the Premier of Nova Scotia said that he would not raise taxes, said that he could balance the budget every year that he was in government, that immediately he would balance the budget. These statements were made absolutely without caveat, just made blankly. I will not raise taxes. I will balance the budget was what he said to the TV cameras, to the people of Nova Scotia in 2009. And we have not seen balanced budgets in the 4 years here in this legislature. And this year's budget is not balanced by any true accounting measure because, for one reason alone, even if I don't go into my concern about revenue estimates and things that might be a little bit more obscure or difficult to bring into the conversation. Let's just look at one item, and that item is the prepayment to the universities, which was raised as well by the critic in the Conservative caucus. The prepayment to universities amounted to $34 million. It paid 2 universities for their costs for this year, for the academic year coming up, but it paid them last year. It paid them in the previous fiscal year. It raised our deficit last year by $34 million, and it allowed, at least on paper, a balanced budget for this year. A balanced budget which was very important for the NDP narrative, hoping to show that they were in control of the finances of the province. But it is not verifiable, it is not true because of the prepayment in the previous year. If everything was properly accounted for in the year in which it occurred, in the year in which it was going to be spent, then the budget is not balanced. So on that one figure alone, the $34 million overturns the very small razor-thin surplus shown in the budget this year. This is another reason why there's no way the official opposition are going to support this FMA, because we're not going to stand by and ignore things that we don't believe are forthright, clear, and precise, which are the 3 words that the finance minister called upon all of us to maintain, that all of us should look at those things. So, as I say, we definitely disagree with that. And, Madam Speaker, on the positive taxes, there was no need to add a referendum for any changes in these positive taxes. That was no more than a political game and a ploy that the government put in there hoping to jam the opposition. Well, it does no such thing, Madam Speaker, because really the opposition has no intention of overturning those tax improvements. And that's just the fact of the matter. We've never said we would. It would not be the right thing to do. We wouldn't do it. Once a tax has been decreased, we know it's not the right thing to change it again. That would be wrong. So that can be laid to rest today. I want to make sure that's clear to everybody. If the minister thinks that we have not been precise, I want to be precise. I have no intention of seeing any of those taxes reversed in the future. The referendum was utterly unnecessary in this bill. And for another reason, that you can legislate things like a balanced budget. We discussed that here with an opposition bill the other day, a Conservative bill to bring in balanced budget legislation. And we all agreed that it isn't really binding, because the first thing that the NDP government did upon being elected, after promising balanced budgets, was to repeal the balanced budget legislation, because they couldn't keep the balanced budget that year, and the law said they had to. So there's an obvious answer to that: repeal the legislation. Then your hands aren't tied anymore. And any government can do that, and every government, I realize, has to look at the circumstances, has to adjust to different economic factors, has to try and govern within the economic reality that they're dealt, the cards that they're dealt. And I'm willing to say that the NDP were dealt a bad hand. We had a big recession in 2008. There was a repeat of it again in 2010, more problems. There was big spending required to match federal contributions to do infrastructure improvements. That was important. We were trying to stave off a deeper recession or a deeper problem. You know, again, it's only right to recognize that when the minister speaks of the difficult times that the government's gone through, that is true, and I hope that the minister will recognize that we agree there has been a difficult time in the last couple of years, 2008 being before the NDP came in, but nevertheless there was that bump and then another difficult bump. And Nova Scotia Power, Madam Speaker, is an area I'd like to speak about before my time elapses, and I might just ask you how long I have to go.
17, 22 minutes.
Would you like that? Okay. All right, well, very good. I just want to make a couple of points that the public feel that we can't win where it comes to Nova Scotia Power. The member from Preston spoke about stranded assets, and by going to more energy efficient and a better environmental regime of having LED lights, we've downloaded the cost onto the municipalities. That's true. That cost will be passed back to property owners. But worse than that, the fact that these light fixtures that in Nova Scotia Power owned were not fully depreciated and still had a useful life means that now they're considered stranded assets, and the ratepayers of Nova Scotia Power will be paying them for the loss of their use. That's what a stranded asset is. It's that you own something, be it a coal-fired power plant that's no longer useful because it's been legislated out of existence, or something like that. Sometimes it's an enormous cost like a power plant, and yet the company can say, well, that still had a useful life of 20 or 30 years, and we need to be compensated for that. So they call those stranded assets, and they get to take back from the ratepayers to compensate themselves for that. So no wonder Nova Scotia Power ratepayers feel like they can't win. We can't win. If there's less power used, then the ratepayers have to make up the difference. If there's more power used, we have to pay extra. There's just no win in this. Even in conservation, there is no win. So we're having a hard time dealing with them, and there's no sense that the government has taken them on in any way, shape, or form. They've been apologists for Nova Scotia Power. They have supported all of Nova Scotia Power's endeavours and things that are enormously profitable to Nova Scotia Power. And they have not stood in their places and stood up for Nova Scotians. And that's something else that I believe people really are feeling very misled and very confused about in this day and age. Well, perhaps not so confused. They know where they stand now. But, Madam Speaker, those are just some of the things that are affecting Nova Scotians. Some of the reasons why we will not show confidence in the government as it stands today in the NDP government, and we will not be in a position to vote for the FMA. Thank you.
If I'm to recognize the Minister of Finance, it will be to close debate.
Madam Speaker, I ask for, I now move third reading, and I would request a recorded vote.
The question is for third reading of Bill number 51, the Financial Measures Act. There's been a request for a recorded vote. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
I realize that the procedure here is to ring the bells, but there's a public function going on downstairs. Is there a way around this? If not, then we just call a recess, and if you want to ring the bells, ring the bells. Yeah. Ring? Okay. Okay, thank you.
We will recess in recognition of the agreement in the House. Okay. It is not agreed, so we will now be ringing the bells until the whips are satisfied. We will now recess until that time. Order, please. Before proceeding with the votes, I want to ensure that all the whips are satisfied. Yes? Okay, thank you. We'll now proceed with a recorded vote. Before doing that, I want to remind members that during these votes, it's important to keep the chatter down. The clerks have had some difficulty with hearing the votes, so say it loud and be sure of which way you are voting, so that we can make sure that the records reflect accurately. The question is for third reading of Bill number 51, the Financial Measures Act. Ask the clerk to proceed with the recorded vote.
Mr. Landry.
Yes.
Ms. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Ms. Peterson-Rayfuse.
Yes.
Mr. Corbett.
Yes.
Mr. Dexter, absent. Ms. Maureen McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Wilson.
Yes.
Mr. Paris.
Yes.
Ms. Jennings.
Yes.
Mr. McDonnell, absent. Mr. Beliveau.
Yes.
Mr. Boudreau.
Yes.
Ms. Zan, absent. Ms. Kent. Ms. Conrad.
Yes.
Mr. Pereira.
Yes.
Mr. Parker.
Yes.
Mr. McKinnon.
Yes.
Ms. Raymond.
Yes.
Mr. Steele, absent. Mr. Epstein.
Aye.
Mr. Estabrooks.
Aye.
Mr. Press.
Yes.
Mr. Ramey.
Yes.
Mr. Skabar.
Yes.
Mr. Wynot.
Yes.
Mr. Morton.
Yes.
Ms. Birdsall.
Yes.
Mr. Burrell.
Yes.
Mr. Manning McDonald, absent. Mr. Gaudette, absent. Mr. Glavine, absent. Ms. Whalen.
No.
Mr. McNeil.
No.
Mr. Sampson.
No.
Mr. D'Entremont.
No.
Mr. Bailey, absent. Mr. Bain, absent. Mr. Porter.
No.
Mr. McMaster.
No.
Mr. McLeod, absent. Mr. Orrell, absent. Mr. Younger. Ms. Reagan.
No.
Ms. Casey.
No.
Mr. Caldwell.
No.
Mr. Zink.
No.
Mr. Terrio, absent. Mr. McClellan.
No.
Mr. Churchill is absent.
Recognize the clerk.
Those in favor, 25. Those against, 11.
The motion is carried.
Bill number 51, an act entitled An Act Respecting Certain Financial Measures.
Order that the bill do pass. Order that the title be as read by the clerk. Order that the bill be engrossed. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, that concludes the government's business for today. Ask the House to now rise to meet from the hours of 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. on Monday. And after the daily routine, we will be doing Bill 70, 76, and 78. And time permits, we will do address and reply. So I wish you to now rise.
Thank you. The motion is that we do now rise to meet again Monday, May the 8th, between the hours of 4 p.m. and 10 p.m. All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. We stand adjourned until Monday. I hope you all have an enjoyable weekend. Thank you.